Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Next Gen Manufacturing webinar series, proudly hosted by RSM Australia and the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. Today's the third in our series and the final. This one's on business transformation. My name's Andrew Sykes, National Technology Leader at RSM Australia. Before we kick off, just got a couple of housekeeping items. If you could keep your microphones on mute, that'd be great. It stops background noise. We'd be really happy with any questions today. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type it in, and we'll either answer it as you go along or we'll make time at the end of the session. We'll also have a recorded version of this webinar, and it will be available to you after today's session. Today, our panel of speakers will provide you with some valuable insight into what it takes to transform a manufacturing business, strategy implementation, measurement of goals, and a bit of a deep dive into analytics and AI. I'll now introduce you to our panel. Andy Graham's a director in the Business Advisory Division of RSM in Brisbane. Andy is a trusted confidant who operates in the inner sanctum with clients, providing both business and personal counsel and advice. Working closely with his clients to deliver results, Andy brings a wealth of significant business experience and a proven track record of strategy development and managing growth to deliver substantial improvements to businesses and clients. We also have Craig LaFoe. He's CEO and founder of Twostone. Twostone is a cloud-based business intelligence company that is obsessed with data and believes that every company should be a data-driven company. Before starting Twostone, Craig worked for 17 years at global FMC giant Mars. Craig's roles included Asia Pac CTO and CIO for Mars Pet Care Asia Pacific. The third member of our panel is Sergeant Dragutinovic, who is a director in the Data Analytics Division at RSM in Melbourne. Sergeant has over 25 years global experience in advanced analytics to support strategic and operational decision making. He has a proven track record of creating value and competitive advantage through the creation of data-driven culture and innovation, and has a combination of technical depth, industry know-how, leadership skills and execution to deliver results. So we're going to start our panel discussion today and welcome everyone on the panel. We'll throw our first question out to you, Andy Graham. Do you have an agile operating model? And can you take us through what this means?
Yeah, sure, Andrew. Good question. I suppose it means different things to different people, but I think at its core, an operating model built around the customer. So changing needs, preferences, and what the customer really values. So essentially delivering value, not just meeting needs. And I think that needs to be supported by the right processes. There being efficient and streamlined processes within the business, and the right governance in place. So not clunky, but shorter decision-making chains. So I suppose if I look at that a little bit further, the value in the value chain, what is it? Where can it be found? Where can it be created? In terms of the structure, what's the capacity and capability to deliver that value? And really in terms of the agile ways of how people work within the system to deliver that value. So the right people in the right place, doing the right things. And I suppose that's underpinned by what I'd call the backbone. So those core processes being lean and efficient, and the people and the technology to really enable agility. And a lot of the times that really requires some changes in culture and also mindset in terms of how they view a agile operating model.
Thanks, Andy. Craig, they say that data is the new oil, and it's often considered the foundation essential for any business. Is that true, and what are some of the critical mistakes companies make?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, foundation's critical. It's like, I guess you can relate it like building a house. If you don't put the right foundation in place, it might look good for a short period of time, but over time it'll start to sort of fall apart. So putting a data foundation in place around the architect of your environment, the ability to automate data flow through your environment so you can report on it. Those sorts of technology foundations, but also the way you actually set it up. So it really needs to be a business-driven project, quite a foundational type process. So can't be technology-led. Often we find that if it's technology-led, you'll fail. So there's some core principles that you need to follow. To build on that data foundation also, you've got to drive that cultural change within your business. So again, not just technology, but that cultural change so people start to actually utilize data to make business decisions. Some of the common mistakes, people often go for the visualization, I guess you could say the sexy type part of data, which is great. You've got to have a balance between foundation and getting those quick wins. But often if people just look at that visualization component and don't build the foundation underneath, it's not a repeatable process that they've actually built. So you've got to make sure that you get the quick wins, but also build the foundation. People, they try and do a bottom-up type approach. You've got to get that senior management or the exec sort of sponsorship because they've got to drive that cultural change through your business. So that's quite critical, and people tend to sort of start from the bottom up instead of a top-down approach. So there's a couple sort of mistakes that people tend to make up front.
That's terrific. Thanks, Craig. Just a question that's come through, and I remind everyone that they're welcome to submit any questions that come through. You mentioned don't focus on the technology. Can you just add a little bit more to that?
It's got to be a balance. What I mean by that, it needs to, if it's a technology-driven project, you're not driving that business change. Yeah, so you've really got to have, I'll give you an example. At Mars, we found that if the business wasn't driving the project, we put a hold on it because we felt we could build the best technical environment there was, best dashboards, best reporting. But if the business change wasn't there and they weren't driving it, it wasn't going to get used. So it really needs to be driven by the business, not necessarily the IT department.
Terrific, thank you. So we all know change is hard. Andy, what do you think is the secret sauce to effectively execute transformation strategies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose I go back to a lot of the things Craig was just saying before. Certainly what I find is common goal and vision, alignment right at the top on what the transformation will actually deliver. So what are our expectations and what's going to be the outcome? And I think those that understand and are focused on growth seem to do it better because the driver of growth tends to align very well with the transformation efforts. I think the other part is around that change management, understanding the need for change as much as owning the change itself. So why are we doing this? What's in it for the business and what will it deliver? And then we start to get into, I suppose, really understanding the capacity and the capability of the business to deliver things, as well as the limitations and the constraints. And what I find is really important is a roadmap that is staged and steps out all the action steps that are required, the dollar investment and the timing. So it's very much about pace and sequency in terms of staging it, and then KPIs or measurements to define, well, how do we know if it's been successful?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. So, Surgeon, manufacturers have been a bit slower compared to other industries when it comes to fully leveraging the intelligence and the amount of data or contained in the vast amount of data that they generate. Can you give us some insight into that?
Well, I think that's probably a fair comment. The manufacturing industry has been relatively slow to adopt analytics. However, it is gaining traction rapidly, and manufacturers are applying analytics to a wide range of business areas, not just operationally, but from finance to supply chain, sales and marketing, and product development. I think one of the reasons, and I think there are a few, that manufacturing has been slow is it's an industry that's been around for a long time, and much of the IT infrastructure was developed before the advent of cloud computing, fast storage, device connectivity, and so forth. And there can be a reluctance to change because if something goes wrong, the whole operation can shut down, business could go bust, someone could die. It's difficult to test software updates or new processes without disrupting the manufacturing process. It's not like a digital business where you can easily create a test environment in the cloud and work through issues there. and as I said, it's not, we are seeing adoption, and it's not just the operational areas. And as Craig mentioned, we're seeing business-led analytics initiatives, which is absolutely vital. Looking at things like, which product families are yielding lower margins, which suppliers are likely to disrupt production, what's the return on investment from marketing and promotional initiatives. Other potential areas include managing your supply chain, reducing warranty spend, overall financial management. And I think we are seeing manufacturers really take the bull by the horns and start applying these initiatives beyond the factory floor. Banks have had similar issues, but have been somewhat quicker, I would say, to work through them. Large, well-established banks, they typically have aging core banking systems and large numbers of disparate source systems. And this is one of the biggest challenges they face. Legacy operating systems that are so entrenched that, any talk of just changing them is just too hard or often gets postponed. These systems are complex, high risk, often interconnected with hundreds of other different systems. So they've had similar challenges, and they've really kind of prevented banks moving more quickly on the digital transformation route to enhance user experience and so forth. And if anybody on the call today has taken out a mortgage with a large bank, you'll know precisely what I'm talking about. Those processes are entrenched in legacy systems, take a long time, are not a pleasant customer journey, frankly. Meanwhile, you've got neobanks that are coming along that, are completely digital, condense and compress the processes to, a vastly quicker experience. They're more simplified, and very much driven from a customer perspective.
So there have traditionally been some barriers there, you're saying. How are companies overcoming them?
Yes, there are barriers actually, and I don't think they are particularly limited to manufacturing. I think that the barriers that I'll talk about now are present in a lot of different industries, and as Craig mentioned, some of them involve getting the foundational aspects correct before you start trying to do, before you start trying to run. You need to learn to walk. So having the right foundations in place to enable data-driven insight and a culture is important. And this includes starting with a clear view of what the strategic objectives are and what the key issues are that you're looking to solve, and then working backwards from there. And it means getting your data management and quality right, having the right governance in place, having the right strategy, a consistent source of truth, agreed upon KPIs and measures, and obviously the right infrastructure in place to support your analytics initiatives. One of the other things that we often see is that there seems to be this gap between where analytics is generated and where it's used, and it doesn't flow through often to the right people in a timely manner. The skill set required to actually do and interpret the analysis is often lacking. So, a lot of our clients and my experience over the last 25 years has shown that, you have a foundation of people that can use Excel, but beyond that, it's very scattergun across the organization. So actually getting analytics initiatives up and running through to be operationalized is definitely a barrier. One of my colleagues, in fact, actually our colleagues in Singapore have recently looked at this from a manufacturing point of view. They conducted a nationwide study across 600 different organizations to try and understand what those potential deterrents were. And I'll list them off here, and some of them are very interesting, but largely apply to any organization. They are staff reluctance to change. They've been doing things in the same way. It works. Why change it? There's a lack of understanding around data analytics, a lack of information systems and infrastructure support, shortage of data analytics experience, both in-house and in the market. So, I suffer from the same thing when I'm looking to recruit staff. It's a difficult challenge to try and find the right level of experience and the right skill set in data analytics. One of the big difficulties is that I see clients facing is an uncertainty of how to measure the results. So setting up analytics initiatives in the right way so that you can measure the incremental impact it has on your business outcome that you're trying to improve is a big barrier, but it's a hugely important thing to get right.
Yeah, thanks for that, Surgeon. Craig, can I ask you and get your opinion on that? And also just a question that's come through, the IoT or Internet of Things. How does that tie in with getting through some of these barriers?
I mean, just as I was thinking as Surgeon was talking, I mean, one of the barriers previously has been IT. The time it has taken the IT department to actually deploy infrastructure, get the solution ready to actually get to a final, report or dashboard for the business to actually utilize, that possibly, used to take 12 months. So the cloud, which we'll talk about more as we get into this conference, that's sort of removed one of those barriers. So it's now becoming more and more important that the business actually jumps on board and drives the project. Internet of Things, if I go back to on-prem Mars days, that would have been very, very difficult to do. Not only possibly wasn't around, but to capture that amount of data. But now with cloud, it's built for Internet of Things. Yeah, so that really starts to enable the use of multiple data sources, large data sources, large data volumes, sorry. So we've got the technology available to actually handle that amount of data. But also the important thing is to handle the data, process it and remove the noise so it's ready for people to actually make decisions.
Okay, thanks. And Surgeon, your thoughts on that?
Just wanted to add that technologies like robotic process automation are enabling us to take that vast amount of information that's generated by things like IoT devices and automate a lot of the processes of collecting, cleansing, using that information for things like reporting or replacing manual processes with automated processes. So it's an exciting development in automation, I guess you would say.
Yeah, so IoT is just all of those little devices attached to machines that hook up to the internet.
That's right. A client of mine currently working with, it's a mine, and it generates from all of its different devices. So things like conveyor belts, drills, trucks, ships, every one of those different items around the mine and within its operation generates a piece of data every between 1 and 3 seconds, and they're generating 120 million items of data every day. Now you need the systems set up in the right way to be able to cope with that amount of data and to be able to make use of it.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question for you, Andy. Is that have you seen businesses that can get that kind of data, identify transformation opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I've got a good example in this sort of space with a manufacturing business that, due to COVID, was significantly impacted. They had 90% of their client base with 5-star accommodation, which basically tanked from March onwards. So they needed to pivot and pivot quickly. So part of it was looking at, as the previous speakers have said, lots of data. So the first thing we looked at was the production data and really looking across their various plants to identify where there was latent capacity and then putting a value on that capacity if it was redeployed. So really just trying to quantify what was the lost opportunity from that latent capacity. The other sort of area we focused on was the market data to analyse and identify volumes versus margin, the market share versus the price point comparative to the competitor. So that was sort of tying in where could we use this latent capacity given what the market data was telling us. Then we sort of started to get a little bit more focused and honed in around different segments that they were targeting. And that analysis was to understand the relative needs of each of those segments. What were the purchase consideration drivers? What were the decision makers? Who were they? What was the volume and margin potential within each of those individual segments? And really in terms of the business, what was the capability of the business to meet the needs of the segments compared to competitors? Where were they strong? Where were they weak? And what did they need to do? So that sort of data enabled us then to map it, and we did a data mapping process, which was quite visual in terms of Google Maps, from production facilities to distribution centres, to time the logistics cost and just what was the quickest route to market. And that enabled us to prioritise what we did in order, and that was based around prioritising the effort versus the payoff and the return on investment. So it was really, in essence, a roadmap of do this first, do this second, do this third, because it was built around the priority needs of the business, but also the ROI and the payoff.
Yeah, that's excellent, Andy. And Craig, based on your experience with your clients at Toustone and the kind of projects Andy's talking about, and also your experience at Mars, what are the key factors we need to consider when we're looking to drive a successful data project?
Mm-hmm. I mean, they do vary, but I'll give you a few based on experience, and it does depend on, obviously the culture and your business. But I mentioned before, it's critical to have that top-down approach because you're trying to drive that business change. We have tried to implement projects before from bottom up, and you may get there, but they take a hell of a long time. So you've got to have that top-down sponsorship and approach. Senior people, they also need to walk the talk. So they're responsible for that cultural change. So they've got to be seen to actually be using the environment, trusting in the data, and making decisions from it. Consistency. Actually, this is common, I would think, across all our Toustone clients as well as Mars, but don't try and bite too much off at one time. Break it down into manageable chunks, whether you break it down by a functional area or a data source. So something like a finance area, manufacturing, supply chain, warehouse, those sorts of areas, and build those siloed sort of data stores up, because that allows you to change the culture within that particular department. But you continue to do them. So you might start with finance, sales, manufacturing, warehouse management, supply chain, and you're building up over a period of time. You're changing the culture. And then the value that we see over, it might be 12 months, 2 years, is people start to move the data across their whole business. So that's where they really start to drive success, when they're looking at their business end to end. So you've got the operational component, which we mentioned before, under control, but then you're really driving the insight end to end across your business.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And touching on that subject again of data being the new oil, businesses have always had data available, and in this sort of new oil rush, Surgeon, can you explain how value can be created from creating a data-driven culture?
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to completely agree with Craig on his point that, there are two approaches that you can take to, getting analytics going in your organization. One is to do an enterprise-wide, big bang, huge transformation. But I've also seen better success in actually doing smaller individual projects that you start seeing the incremental benefit from. It starts actually changing the culture. You start seeing the value generated by those initiatives. And it's almost like a self-funding exercise. So one project funds the next project. And before you know it, you've got the organization on board, you've got leadership on board, you've got buy-in at all levels. And it just enables you to get game-changing analytics up and running in an organization much more quickly and successfully. Sorry to digress. So back onto your question. Look, I think just following on from what I've just said, creating a data-driven culture across an organization is essential if you want to move beyond just a few small data initiatives and islands of excellence, but limited in certain business areas. And that's how most organizations start. They'll have somebody who's passionate about data analytics, passionate about data, that starts fiddling around with data on their own PC and starts demonstrating some value. But without that leadership buy-in and somebody that sponsors those initiatives, they typically go nowhere or stay on that person's desktop PC, which is the worst of all worlds. So a data-driven culture really embraces the use of data in decision making. And that's what it's all about. Analytics is there for one purpose, and that's to enhance decisions made in the organization. It treats data as a strategic asset of the company by making it more widely available. So, the democratization of data is hugely important, getting data into the hands of the right people at the right time. If I were to describe where most organizations start, it's what I'd call a pre-analytics environment where there's no real support for the effort, but there are pockets of people throughout the organization that may be interested in, the value it can bring and, trying to push it, and they're testing things. At this stage, most leaders are unaware of the power of analytics. IT and business, I typically see at this stage, they're competing, that IT thinks they're in the data, the business actually needs that data and to make to do the analytics and to make the decisions. So really getting that relationship working is an important step. And often, it's cultural and political issues that actually stop analytics becoming more pervasive. You might hit a roadblock when you try to operationalize something because you're part of that process, or your part of the business is part of that process, and without wider buy-in, you can't actually get that process up and running across the organization, across divisions. So the reason organizations strive to maximize the value of their data, and to create a data-driven culture, is that the company realizes that analytics is a competitive differentiator, and innovation in data analytics should be at its core.
So what I'm hearing is that when we look at data and agile transformation, it's not just an IT project. Craig, do you have a view on that? What is the cultural, following on from what Surgeon said, what is the cultural change required to be a data-driven company?
It's a big change, and it takes time, and it has to sort of go through all of your business. If I can, just use a Mars example, when we were rolling that out a few years ago from a BI project point of view, is we had the management team sponsorship, and they would have a management team meeting. They'd have people from the different divisions come in, whether the sales, manufacturing, and so forth, to present, and we got them to sort of say, if someone was presenting information, they actually asked the question, where did that information come from? And if they said, they didn't say it came from the data warehouse or what we would call the version of the truth, they were more or less asked to sort of go away and come back later, because they needed to change, actually drive that cultural change. And if they didn't, so as was mentioned before, walk the talk, then it gave people excuses to go off and create their spreadsheets and do the manual work and everything. So it really needs to be driven. A couple of other things that I've seen work across quite a few clients and at Mars is that sort of function, identifying that functional expert or key user within your business that sort of has a good understanding of business process, understands the data, understands your transactional system, and they can work with the technical people to actually develop that reporting environment. I mean, that's critical, because not only are you delivering something that's going to be utilized by the business, but that person has the trust of the people around them, so that they're sort of the go-to person as you start to roll out your training programs and so forth. Another key point is you've got to build trust in your data. Don't allow people excuses to revert back to the old ways of doing it. And we still see a lot of companies out there that are very reliant on Excel and manual development of reports. So very error prone, and people, a lot of people struggle with change. If their role is to actually create an Excel report once a week or once a month, they tend to get pretty precious about it. So if you all of a sudden come along and say, we don't need to do that anymore, but here's an automated dashboard that you can now analyze, it's actually quite a big change for them. So we try and help people sort of move away from creating to analyzing information, and it's actually a big step. So instead of creating the Excel report, start analyzing information, because it's a different mindset and different process that you need to follow. So there's that whole top to bottom type process that you've got to run through. But then to continue driving it, Surgeon said as well, is you've got to keep adding more stuff. So whether that's new data sources or new technology, whether it's AI, external data sources, maybe you can bring weather data in, supplier data, customer data, but you've got to continue to add more. You've got to keep it relevant. Yeah, so you've got to keep adding data sources over time. So you get that operational component under control. You reduce your time for people to do their jobs, you improve their business processes, and then you keep driving the new insight for your business.
So would it be fair to say, Craig, that we're now moving into a world, or companies that are starting to get an advantage on their competitors are those who don't just work on creating the data, or seeing if the data is correct, but understanding what the data means?
Yeah, and often people, when they do data projects or BI projects, they'll roll out training programs, but they tend to train people on how to use the tool, but not to understand the actual data. So two very big things. Big differences. So really, it's about learning the tools of today is relatively easy. If they're designed right and developed right. So then you got to take that next step to ingrain people's thought process and how you actually utilize the data to drive the insight. And that means their understanding of your business and your business process needs to be at a lower level, so they can get in there and navigate around the data to actually drive that improvement. And that continues to improve, because then they might be looking at their own functional area, but then they can add other functional data to, again, that cross-business type look.
Yeah, so Surgeon, everyone likes some real life examples, and you don't have to name names, but can you give some examples where data has been used in the way we're talking about to create some value?
Yeah, absolutely. Where do I begin with this? So, some of my work in the past has been done in the financial crime and terrorist funding space. So it's a very heavily scrutinized area, and quite often you're looking for patterns or things in the data that you're actually unaware of at a particular point in time. So, the crooks, they're constantly trying to change and adapt their behavior based on the changing rules, and it's a game of cat and mouse. So, we've used some quite innovative techniques on the data in the past. So gathering a wide variety of sources of data to build a picture of how customers interact with each other, and try and unearth patterns of behavior using various kind of segmentation techniques to understand a customer the way they have had some undesirable behavior in the past. Looks very similar to a customer who is not flagging as having that undesirable behavior, but sits geospatially very close to them. So by that I mean a lot of their characteristics are very similar. So it may actually be worth monitoring them. They may actually be flying under the radar because they know all of the KYC and the AML rules very well, and can actually adapt their behavior, but you're still interested in those people, yet your traditional techniques for identifying them are just not cutting the mustard, and you're not finding them. So, leveraging some advanced analytics on a wide variety of data sources in that space can really help banks understand where they should be focusing their efforts beyond what they're already monitoring.
So some real value can be driven from it. So Andy, we've we've got our culture right. We're in our transformation program. How does accelerated digital adoption enable a business to reimagine itself?
Yeah, sure. Good question. I think probably just preface that by a lot of businesses as a result of COVID, they're still reactivating. So they're certainly coming out of that sort of stage of the cycle. But for those that are looking at more the future orientation, I think it sort of enables a business to satisfy their near-term needs, but as well as the longer-term goals of being sort of future ready. So it not only involves a revamp of parts of the business's operations to make them more efficient and streamlined, but also to develop capabilities to use digital to do things differently within their business, whether that be with customers, with suppliers, or with their people. So, for example, if we talk about customers these days, it's the everything customer. They're not purely digital, but they want the speed and the ease of digital, but maybe the hand-holding of the human interaction to step them through the process. Also, any scale operations. So can you scale up? Can you scale down? Can you shift direction? Without too much impact on, say, headcount or operating expense ratios, or even just the underlying infrastructure changes that might be required to deliver that. So I think we're also seeing a really sort of adaptable, flexible sort of approach come through with remote or hybrid workplaces for employees, and even in the sense of ways of learning, whether that be face-to-face, whether that be online, or whether that be blended. So there's lots of sort of drivers that really assist a business to turbocharge their efforts in the sort of accelerated adoption of digital. But then it's also about prioritising those competing, sometimes very much competing needs around the investments based on the strategic intent of the business, and very much business case around the ROI and what will it deliver today, but more importantly, what it will deliver in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Look, when we look at business transformation, one of the things I always say is that the ability for a business to grow is constrained by its leadership. Craig, how will this new data and technology and AI as well, AI insights, provide support to leadership and allow them to do a better job?
Yeah, big question, but there's a couple of core ones. I mean, first one that comes to mind is probably speed of decision making. If I look at again, a lot of clients previously, the manual development of reports, just they're looking in the rear vision mirror at their business. Yeah, so if they only get a report once a week or once a month, the time's gone by, they're looking backwards at their business and they can't make decisions to actually influence their performance. So having that foundation in place and the automation that we've spoken about just puts the data at your fingertips. So you've got that ability to make decisions right now. So then, to me, even though we're in data, it's about maybe not going 100%, but moving a little bit away from gut feel and being a little bit more data driven in your decision making. I'm not saying, I would never say gut feel will go away. You've got to be relying on people's experience and knowledge and everything that's happening around us. But just, I guess, moving the balance a little bit so that you're supporting some of your gut feel with fact-based data. So that also builds confidence in from a leadership point of view. If you're making faster decisions, you're backing it up with facts, and people have more confidence around the decision-making process that you're actually running through. We had an example at Mars. We used to run what we called analytical sprints. We'd have the senior exec in a room. We had people that knew how to run the tools, and you'd have the supply chain manager, this general manager, the sales, and you just started to ask questions. So what if this happens? And one of the core ones was, what's the impact of sales promotions on manufacturing? So is a promotion where I actually get a spike in sales actually profitable or not? Because the configuration changes within the factory to support the products to support that promotion, maybe you're actually losing money. And we actually did see that quite a few times. So all of a sudden, when you're combining your manufacturing costs with your promotional costs and your uplift in sales due to a promotion, actually it looks good from a top line point of view, but overall you're actually losing money. So just providing that insight. The last one is I know I go back to foundation, but it is critical. If you want to start advancing into AI, that's just going to speed that decision-making process up even more. But it's going to be a hell of a lot easier if you've got that data foundation in place now. So you've got to go through that maturity. I don't think many organizations could jump from where they potentially are now straight into AI. They need to go through a bit of a maturity curve to get there, and having that foundation in place will just make it a lot easier.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So what I'm hearing there is that data can make an effective leader who operates off gut instinct great, because it can back up their decisions and stop them losing money on the ones that don't work.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
Exactly.
Just a reminder that we do have time for questions. So any questions, just enter them in on the Q&A box. So Surgeon, a lot of disruption been happening this year and in a lot of industries. What can manufacturing learn from other industries about disrupting itself?
Well, I just wanted to comment on the gut feel point that Craig and you just raised, actually. And in my previous role, we did a large global survey that asked leaders, how decisions were made. And it still shocks me to this day that such a high proportion is still on gut feel. I agree that that business knowledge needs to be used in conjunction with the data-driven approach, but just basing decisions, I think it was something like 57%, and this was a range of large multinational organizations, and I think when you've had a year like we've just had, I think gut feel is something quite dangerous to base decisions on, because your gut feel is probably going to be horribly wrong, given the amount of uncertainty that's around. And yes, analytics is facing its own challenges. A lot of the models that would have predicted what's likely to happen next are not going to work either, because that whole historical data set that it's based on has now changed. Customer preferences have changed. But at least having a handle on what's happening, what the possibilities of what's going to happen, enables and equips you with more informed decision-making skills. So onto your question around disruption, I think it's fair to say disruption was on the increase anyway before COVID, and it's probably increased exponentially, particularly for certain industries. So increasing computing power, technology adoption, information sharing, they were all drivers before this. Add on COVID, and I think disruptions going through the roof. And I'm not just talking about disruption from an efficiency point of view, or looking to disrupt certain processes internally just to get incremental benefits. There are companies like NVIDIA out there that what they're doing in the AI space is causing disruption on a mass scale for virtually all companies, from startups to companies that have been around for 100 years. And I think companies that embrace disruption, and they know the importance of investing in technologies like AI and data management, but it's difficult, and organizations have trouble not only responding to disruption, but actually disrupting themselves. And I think to overcome these challenges, companies, they should have a business process in place that identify vulnerabilities, and emerging business models and technologies that can mitigate them. And instead of, and we've harped on about this a few times today, and instead of starting with technology solutions, you should always work backwards by asking, what's the biggest challenge that we face, and then how do we solve that, and work back from there. So if you look at some of the disruption stories that have happened over the years, everyone knows the Netflix blockbuster. But if you look at someone like Garmin, who are still around and thriving well today, their share price today, I think, is around $113. And in 2007, it was, I think, $119. But if you look at the journey that they've had over the last 13 years, it's been a roller coaster. They were the leader in GPS devices for cars and boats and so forth. And, they had competitors like TomTom, but, they just didn't see, well, they saw the competitor coming, but they just didn't think it was a real competitor. And that's obviously the smartphone. They continue to focus on their, hardware devices, and those sales plummeted for, 6 or 7 years in from about 2007 onwards. Like I said, it's not that they didn't see them coming, but, the leadership massively underestimated the threat, and didn't really think that mobiles would achieve sufficient capabilities, in mapping and navigation. And they really paid the price for it. Now, they survived because they had a diversified business, and, they're thriving in, the non-automotive sector now, like, athlete tracking devices and watches and so forth. And to take a more contemporary example, something that's happening right now that we don't know the outcome of the disruption is the deepfake technology. So, deepfake is the use of machine learning to superimpose images and videos on other images and videos. And, besides the implications of an AI technology that can take the likeness of anyone and make them do or say whatever they want, think fake news, it brings with it a potential to disrupt the entertainment industry, which, it's a $2 trillion market. And if you look at one specific example, Netflix spent $160 million making The Irishman, and a significant portion of that budget was spent creating the de-aging effects for a cast of actors that span decades. And it's a great movie, but the effects are somewhat divisive. Some think they don't quite work convincingly enough and detract from the story and acting. Now, within a few weeks of the movie's release, a YouTuber had recreated and far surpassed the de-aging effects of Robert De Niro that Netflix had spent tens of millions of dollars to create. And to cap it off, he used his desktop PC, some free software, and a little bit of knowledge of Python. Now, the disruption lies in the implications for movie making, for special effects companies, for actors, and the entertainment industry as a whole. We just don't know where that's leading, but that technology now is out there, and it's gonna disrupt that whole industry. So the point there is really just, sorry, one last point. The point is, that the democratization of that technology and data has opened up the industry to virtually anybody, from someone in their bedroom. And it's not just that field. If you think of the medical field, you've got students now sequencing the genome, in their bedrooms, which, just a few years ago was the domain of, health professionals with very expensive equipment.
Yeah, so we've seen that on, what hasn't been, as you mentioned with Garmin, a recognised but not quantified disruptor. Is cloud something similar to BI or business intelligence, Craig? Is cloud mean something like that to BI?
Yeah, it has. It's actually, like chalk and cheese, really. I mean, I've experienced on-premise, what we call on-premise type BI environments, at Mars. That they actually sometimes take 12 months to actually build. That's just the infrastructure, to get to design it, to raise the capital project, get approval, purchase, wait for the delivery, rack and stack. The whole thing used to take 8 to 12 months. And just to maintain the environment was very hard as well. So the more data you added, the more upgrades you had to do. But I think what the cloud has allowed is it's actually removed the barrier to entry for a lot of people. So if I look at BI over the year, going back even only 5 or 6 years ago, the cost of entry was just too high. You'd have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, on as an example, for the right hardware just to get started. Now, with the cloud, you can actually start with one user. You can spin up an environment very quickly. You can start ingesting data. So you can start small and build, which is some of the principles that we've been talking about. So the cloud allows you actually to follow that process, whereas previously on-prem, you've got the environment there, probably built for 3 years, and you've got that investment. Now I can start small and I can continue to grow. And I sort of mentioned this previously or early on that I honestly think that, on-prem IT was the boat anchor to the business. The business would come along and say, let's get into data, let's do data warehousing, and 12 months later, we're ready, and they've moved on to something else. Now we can react a lot quicker because we can spin things up, we can migrate, we can say, what technology do you want? We can change, we can add AI functions pretty easily. So that entry to barrier around speed, scale, and cost, the cloud is actually removed.
So you no longer have to be a big business to do BI. So that could be, small operation, 10, 20 staff, small manufacturer. It's cost effective to get into BI.
So much more cost effective. And we see a lot of small, medium enterprises now, not just the big guys in town, but a lot of small, medium enterprises are realizing the value. And they may only have, 3 different source systems, but the ability to join those 3 source systems and the data into a dashboard, and when they look at the cost and the value that they get out of it, they're able to enter into the BI sort of space.
Yeah. So, Surgeon, did you also have a view on that cloud impact?
Yeah, I'll just completely agree with it. We're seeing our clients, digitally, and we've seen it, the market react to the pandemic and digitally transform themselves in a matter of weeks, and that's only been enabled through cloud technology. If the pandemic had happened 10 years ago, there's no way that as many businesses that have evolved and digitally transformed themselves would have survived what's happened. And you just need to look at the share prices of Snowflake and AWS and Microsoft to see how that kind of adoption has driven their share prices up over the last year or so.
Excellent, thank you, and some great insights there. So we're coming up to our last question, which I'll put out to each of you on the panel, starting with you, Andy. How does business get started, and what do you see as the barriers for success to get it started in a digital or agile transformation program?
Yeah, look, I think it's a couple of things. With business owners and the leadership team, it's as much about understanding what the benefits of the transformation are, but also, the flip side is, what are the consequences if they don't go there? What are the consequences not only today, but in the next 12 months, 3 years? So I suppose I've shifted my thinking a little bit around that. Just not only the benefits, but the consequences of not doing it. So I think as part of that, it's really identifying what are the immediate needs and where's the payoff straight away. So COVID's provided a perfect opportunity or landscape, if you like, where it's flashed up things that need to be fixed within the business, where the business was vulnerable. Whether that was, needing to right scale operations to sort of react quickly to new market realities around demand. But there's a number of things which will drive it. I think for me that I pick on three for the key barriers to success. And I think one is not truly understanding the capacity of the business and what it can do. But then also the capability to execute. So do they have the right skill sets to be able to do that, or do they need to get those in? And of course, the other one is the investment. So what is the investment, and is there an expectation on when the ROI will occur, how quickly that will occur, and to what extent? So they're probably the main things that I see around, one, getting started, but also some of the barriers.
And what's your thoughts on that, Craig?
Yeah, just to back up Andy, I mean, people, you just got to start. Yeah, you may not know where you're going to end up, and people often have trouble taking that first step. A lot of people I've seen, and a lot of clients, they sort of they use the data quality as an issue, and we can't start. Our data's not right. We can't. It doesn't. But we actually run through a process where you use the visualization of your data actually to clean up the quality of it. And because you've got the automation, your visualization is bringing out your data qualities. And sometimes we've seen people that have had it there for years and they just never noticed it. But the visualization brings it out. Because you've got the automated process, you fix it up in your source system and it runs through. So you got to really start and not, mentioned before, the barriers of entry have been greatly reduced. It's not a big high risk thing anymore. You're not gonna, you can start small. So just get that start going, and you will evolve and learn as you go.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And Surgeon, your thoughts on that?
I would just say, always start with a focus on the business issue you're trying to solve, not just the tools, packages, or platforms. Generate value early and often. Implement, I think, as Craig said, analytics in bite-sized chunks that deliver incremental value in a timely manner. I think this really helps build positive momentum and generates benefits that can be used to fund subsequent larger enterprise efforts if needed. Develop a phase strategy that aligns with your strategic priorities over the next 1, 2, 3 years, and importantly, measure the results and make sure there's a feedback loop to learn and adjust your strategy based on what you learn.
Thank you very much, team. That brings us up to the end of our allotted time. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for today, and thank everyone who's attended and watched this. If you do have any further questions following on from this, we'll be sending out a link to this recording. And if you respond to that email, we'll be able to answer any of your questions that may come up after this. Thank you very, very much for attending today's session, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.